Alright, too, back course talking FF7. We're here to talk about some Rebirth, and we have another interview with Hamaguchi, this time with SquareEnixGames.com. It's admittedly some of the stuff we've looked at before. It's, you know, him talking about Queen's Blood and the ending of the game and the Platinum Trophy, trophies in general, I suppose. But it is a new interview, so we're here to look at it. There are some other interviews out there that I've seen people doing translations for or just posting information for on Twitter, like Edge Magazine or something like that, that we'll probably look at in the next day or so. So let's hop right into it. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth got such a strong critical reception when it came out. Did you and the team celebrate? Yes, we did. Actually, if you think back to when we released the Final Fantasy VII Remake, it was right in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, so unfortunately, we weren't able to have a big celebration event for that. So when we released Rebirth, we decided we'd have a combined event for both games to celebrate them. We got the whole team, including outsourced people who had worked on the game, and went for a big celebration together in Aoyama, Tokyo? How the fuck you say that shit? We hired a church in that area so everyone could fit in for the celebration. Obviously, we chose that because there's one in Remake, and we had it done up to look like the church in the game, with flowers spread everywhere. That was kind of cool because it's something I've never heard before, them celebrating the release, I guess, of Rebirth and also Remake, because they couldn't celebrate it back in 2020. And they went to like a church and like had it done up to look like the Sector 5 slums church. Pretty cool. I wonder if there's pictures of that. There had to be like documentation of that. Somebody was taking pictures or videos, right? I wonder if that's something we'll ever get to see. I also wonder, besides, you know, obviously it's a church and they have flowers everywhere, how much it actually look like the Sector 5 church? Do they actually go through the effort to make it like directly look like that, or just sort of vaguely like it? Also thought it was pretty cool of them to invite people that they outsourced aspects of the game to, because they could have simply just done like the main development team. From your perspective, what elements of the game have fans best responded to? First, the story. As a sequel to the first game in this series, it's something that has resonated well with a lot of people. But perhaps more than that, what hit home with people is that this is different in a lot of ways to previous Final Fantasy titles. Traditionally, Final Fantasy is a very sequential type of game. You follow along the storyline and generally don't go off the beaten path too much. For Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we created this vast world that allowed players to explore freely in all kinds of different experiences around the map. That's something that really did hit a positive reaction from the fans. Certainly, all the people who made the game seem to really like that direction as well, so hopefully we'll be able to use that in future games we make as a team. So the last part was kind of interesting just because Hamaguchi kind of alluding to the next game they might make as a team, which we talked about somewhat recently, where he might, you know, his team might make like Final Fantasy 17, maybe another FF7 related project or something else, you know, brand new entirely. It seems like whatever game they might make next after Remake Part 3 could maybe be an open world style game similar to Rebirth, which is great. Those are some of my favorite games. Like, you know, I know not everybody's into like open world games, but something about it works for me, man. I just love those kinds of games where there's just a vast world to explore, there's all kinds of things to find, and environmental storytelling, all that other shit. And obviously, I do love linear games too, but something about open world games work. I think what they did with Rebirth was great. It's like 90% there, because I think they could tweak the world intel shit and make it a little bit better, right? And I wouldn't mind, you know, more like kind of environmental storytelling, more things to find in the regions that we've yet to go to. Also wonder when it comes to the third game, since we're going to have the freedom to explore the Highwind and travel the whole world, we're going to be able to go back to regions that we visited in the second game, right? Like Junon and the grasslands and stuff. And what are we going to be doing in those regions? Because we already did everything that we could in Rebirth, right? We already did all the world intel stuff. So, like, what are we going to be doing there again? Like, when we go back to Junon, is there just going to be, like, side quests to do? Or are there going to be, like, things to find and do in the world? I don't know. Hamaguchi mentioned, you know, Rebirth is quite different to a lot of the previous Final Fantasy games. Maybe all of them besides, I guess, like, an MMO Final Fantasy. Because they are quite linear in terms of, like, how the game progresses, as he mentioned. And Rebirth is sort of linear in that you obviously got to follow the story. You can't just like go from the grasslands and just, I'm going to go to the fucking Corel right now from the very beginning. Obviously, you do got to follow the story, but the regions that you're in, there's a lot of freedom to like explore and do stuff, right? It sort of like reminds me of what the game felt like when it's a kid. When you play like the older Final Fantasies as a kid, they seemed a lot bigger than they were. They're obviously quite linear. Very linear, really, until you get like the fucking Highwind. Yeah, Rebirth kind of puts me back in that mindset I had as a kid to a certain degree, where it felt like when I was playing through FF7, even though I'm just walking from fucking, you know, Midgard to Calm to the fucking Mithril Mine, like, that felt massive. It felt like there's a lot to do, and there really isn't when you play it in, like, the modern day. One element that fans have really taken to is Queen's Blood. When we previously spoke before release, you indicated that you were confident about it, but were you still surprised by the reaction? My honest feeling is that I'm so glad that it went down well. As I said, I was confident in Queen's Blood before it came out, but I was still surprised. The reaction was so much greater than even I had expected it would be. Honestly, it delighted me, and it delighted the team as well. Really not a whole lot to add there, obviously, because Queen's Blood is popular. We know this. We've been knowing this for, 9, almost 10 months now at this point. I am still curious how they're going to improve upon it in the next game. I don't know. I'm kind of curious how they're going to improve upon it in the next game, because they do want to like tweak it a bit. You can obviously add more cards that have, different kinds of abilities and different kinds of powers and costs, and they take zones in different ways than cards that exist in Rebirth. But I imagine they want to like actually update the game in some way. I don't know what you do exactly. We've talked about like, abilities or powers, like one-time uses. Like kind of like Gwent, if you played Gwent in Witcher 3, where there's like a leader ability, I believe it is. It's been a while since I played Gwent. But you can like use it like one time, kind of anytime. It's during your turn, obviously, but you can just kind of implement it one time during like the match or whatever. Something along those lines. You could also do like different size boards. People have suggested like it's a 5x3, right? So maybe you do like a 7x5 or something. Kind of interesting. I'm not saying they need to overhaul the game entirely because you can keep it a 3x5 normally, but there could be like, competitions or challenges like the Gold Saucer or something like that where you have different size boards, like 7x5. You can even do like a 3x3 for like kind of quicker games that just make you like build decks differently because you have limited zone size or bigger zone size, right? What kind of Queen's Blood player are you? All about boosting, destruction deck. When we've got the full selection of cards and you can do your deck building fully, I really like the kind of playstyle where you try and destroy the enemy's territory. I always find myself playing those kinds of cards that destroy enemy cards and win enemy areas, rather than the kind of playstyle where you try to put a card down to get more for your hand. I prefer being aggressive. I am somewhat similar to Hamaguchi in that way, where like I like to destroy my opponent's cards if I can. I'm kind of in the middle actually, because I use a little bit of boosting cards too, because I did use like the Chocobo as one of my cards for a long time, and I used like the Death Claw eventually, which powers up whenever your opponent's cards are destroyed. And I used some cards to destroy my opponent's cards. I also use the Crab that like I think it boosts the upward space, like I think +2 or something like that. So I kind of did a mix of like taking my opponent's zones and destroying their monsters, but also boosting my own cards too. And actually, now that we're talking about some more Queen's Blood stuff, another way they can improve the game in the third game is allowing us to play more games, right? They obviously had a lot of like side stuff in Rebirth, like in Costa del Sol and Gold Saucer. There's a lot of like different kind of competitions and challenges and stuff. I really like the ones they had in Costa del Sol where you have to like win in one turn, right? They give you a handful of cards or some cards on the field. Your opponent already has an established field, and you got to try to figure out how to win in that one turn, right? You got to place the cards correctly in the correct order, in the correct zones or whatever. It reminds me of some of the Yu-Gi-Oh games if you guys have ever played that shit. I think they also have it on Duel Links where the similar thing. They give you like a handful of cards, maybe some cards on the field. Your opponent already has an established field. You got to figure out how to win in one turn, right? You got to use the right combination of cards. And those are really fun. There's a lot of trial and error there. Those are, I think, really great. But I do miss the days of like older Final Fantasies like 8 and 9 where you could just walk around a town and hit square and like challenge people to games of Triple Triad or Tetramaster, right? And I would love to be able to do that with Queen's Blood. I don't know if they're going to do that, but it'd be a nice update to the game. What feedback have you taken from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that you are applying to future projects? When I look back at the game, a lot of the things we aim to get across to players really hit home. The reactions were exactly what we were hoping for, so there aren't many areas where we think we tried to do this but it didn't turn out so well. But if there's one thing that's an exception to that, it would be the trophies. I think we're going to look at the difficulty for unlocking trophies in the third game and set it at a level that's more achievable for most people. So we discussed this not too long ago on the channel because Hamaguchi mentioned in a somewhat recent interview about making maybe the Platinum Trophy a little bit easier in the third game. I'm fine with Platinum Trophies being a little bit difficult to get. The problem with Rebirth is that to get all the trophies, you have to do literally every fucking thing in the game. Like you have to pretty much collect every single thing, do all the hardest fights in the game, beat the game on hard mode. You have to not only beat every minigame, but you got to beat every minigame on fucking hard, right? The only place where they give you a little bit of like leeway is the piano minigame because you only have to get like A rank on like 6 of them, I believe. So they don't make you have to get like an S rank, which would be maybe a little too much. I don't know. It's honestly a little surprising when you think about it that they didn't like kind of force players to have to get an S rank on the piano minigame because they make you do the maximum for every goddamn thing else. I'm fine with like a hard mode playthrough being required and some of the harder fights in the game, like the simulator fights, being the requirement for a trophy, but like forcing every single person that wants to potentially go for the platinum to be very good at literally every fucking minigame in the game is a little ridiculous, I think. Also, in case you guys don't follow me on Twitter and or Bluesky, I did very recently finish all the simulator fights in Rebirth, which was a bit of a grind. It's not really super hard with guides, of course. I'm not above using guides because I'm just not that good at these games. But it's mostly the Zack and Cloud fight and the Cloud and Sephiroth fight that are at the end of the simulator that are really the actual hard ones. Also, there's other weird requirements where you have to like max out Johnny's like Seaside Inn, right? And when you go to like the wall of like those little like trophies that you collect for him, like there's weird stuff you gotta do. Like you gotta get like all 3 girls in like the play in the Gold Saucer, right? Like I already got Tifa and Aerith. And you gotta get Yuffie in the player or something like that. And then I also missed one that's like you gotta smash so many boxes in the Shinra Manor. I guess as Kate said or something. I don't know. I missed that apparently. It's other like weird shit, but it's mostly like, obviously mini games. Like I think you do all the mini games on hard mode to get to party level 10, which is required for a trophy, which is also again required for the platinum. So I think toning that down a bit. I don't want to spend too much time here talking about goddamn trophies for the third game, but I just think you could tone that down a bit, where you're not required to do every single thing in a game to get the platinum trophy. Like it should be just a little bit easier than that. Without going into spoilers, the ending has sparked a lot of discussion amongst fans. Is the reaction what you expected? Yes, we've had some people who are really positive towards the ending. They really liked it. On the other hand, we've had people who maybe weren't so keen on it, have more negative things to say. I think both of these opinions are very valid and worthwhile, and to borrow something that Mr. Katase says, We want to inspire speculation and discussion amongst fans during the gap between the second and third game. People are still talking about it. You have positive takes and negative takes, interesting discussions, and sometimes they all collide. It's basically the response we wanted to achieve. So in a lot of ways, this is like the biggest problem with the ending of Rebirth, is that the entire purpose or point of it was to simply spark a discussion between the second game and the third game. I don't know if they were always wanting to do this, or if they've seen like the reception to the ending of Remake and how much, discussion there was and fan theory crafting and all that other shit. They just wanted to kind of like replicate that to a certain degree. I don't know. But you're sacrificing what is one of the most important moments in like all of gaming, right? The death of Aerith in FF7 and FF7 PS1. You're making it this convoluted, is it real, is it not sort of thing, instead of just giving us what we know is already happening. Simply because you want people to talk about it up until the next game comes out. It's this weird problem they have with Rebirth in some of the emotional moments where they don't let them breathe, right? Like the ending of Rebirth, where you can't really focus on the fate of Aerith because they keep jumping between her talking to Cloud and her being dead and the blood and the no blood and the group mourning her and all other shit. And then like the dying segment that we talked about, which I do think is still emotionally effective, but you can't even accept the fact that like dying has just sacrificed himself and he's put this guilt on Barrett, and then you're fighting Palmer in a fucking frog mech, and then you're doing like a rail shooter right afterwards. It's like, what happened? There's emotional moments in Remake where you got to like let it breathe, right? There's a whole like chapter dedicated to post Platefall where you gotta like accept this and deal with the fact that all these people died, and you're trying to find like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge and all that other shit, and you don't really get stuff like that in Rebirth. It's weird. Kind of weird too, because they want people to talk about this shit, leading up to the third game. But when it came to like the ending of Remake, they were always pretty vague about it. Versus with the ending of Rebirth, like in every other interview, Kitase is talking about how Aerith is dead. They didn't change the ending. They didn't want to sacrifice that important moments. Cloud's not accepting that she's dead all the time. So there's really no discussion to be had when they keep confirming that she is dead. And of course she is dead, because that's what happened in the original game. It's not to say that Aerith is completely gone from the story, because obviously she's going to be in the live stream in these other worlds doing some sort of shit very similar to Zack. Maybe even her and Zack and Biggs are going to be doing stuff together. I don't know how it's going to work in the third game, right? There's going to be more Aerith, fucking obviously. But obviously, in terms of like the story that we've been following in Remake and Rebirth, she's not going to be on the planet walking around and fighting with our group, right? It's just not going to happen. To be honest, I actually like the idea of Cloud like not accepting her death, and like that being like a different kind of spin on the ending and a different spin on the FF7 story. I think it could have been handled a little bit better. But I'm kind of curious how like it's actually going down. So like when Cloud's like talking to Aerith, is he actually talking out loud, or is it all in his head, right? Like, is he really turning to a side, talking to somebody that's not actually there, and like, is the group seeing him do this shit? Because obviously, if they're seeing that, he looks like a fucking crazy person. And also, as we talked about a few times on the channel, like, what does this mean going into the next game? Because if he's not accepting her death, like, how is our group not going to talk about Aerith's fate? How are they not going to talk about Aerith dying, except for killing her? Like, is Cloud just going to block that out every time they talk about it? Like, what are we doing in the next game? It's kind of weird. I think that's kind of it for this video. There's a couple more questions, but they're not necessarily important for the things that we talk about here on the channel. So yeah, another interview where the devs talk about the ending of Rebirth. How goddamn exciting. Of course, best off to you guys on, I guess, kind of anything we talk about in this video. How do you think they can improve Queen's Blood in the next game? What are your thoughts on the open world for Rebirth? How can they improve it in the third game? What are your thoughts on the ending? Should we talk about the ending again in the comments? I love talking about the ending of Rebirth. It's super, super exciting. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search numbers in the description below. Follow me through dashingdavidbusiness. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane, we in here like Low Gain, or leave it like Cobain.